Hey y'all, if you haven't caught part 1 of the series yet, make sure you check it out first. Trust me, you don't want to miss the jaw-dropping secrets we uncovered there. Now let's dive right back in.
Part 13. Drag strips, dynos, and exposed lies. If GM wanted to hide the W30's real power, they failed miserably. At drag strips across America, from Detroit to California, the 442 W30 was blowing past official horsepower ratings. Stock for stock, it was running low 13s to high 12s on street tires. That wasn't supposed to happen with just 370 horsepower. Car magazines couldn't ignore it either. In 1970, Hot Rod magazine tested a 442 W30 and clocked a 13.3 second quarter mile at 106 med-ph. That was right on par with, and sometimes quicker than, the Chevelle LS6 and Hemi Cuda. Fans started asking questions. If this is only 370 horsepower, then what's Chevy really making? Did GM lie to us about all their muscle cars? This was dangerous for GM. If buyers realized horsepower ratings were manipulated, the whole muscle car credibility game could crash. So GM doubled down, sticking to their official numbers, denying the rumors, and keeping Oldsmobile classy in brochures while street racers knew the dirty truth. The W30 wasn't just a car anymore. It became a symbol of rebellion, a muscle car that defied corporate lies. Part 14. Racing Controversies and NHRA Shadows. The NHRA, National Hot Rod Association, added another layer to this story. In the early 70s, muscle cars were proving grounds not just on the street, but on sanctioned drag strips. The NHRA classified cars by advertised horsepower, meaning, if GM said the W30 made 370 HP, that's where it raced, which gave Oldsmobile an unfair advantage. Their 370 HP car was actually putting down 420 plus. Suddenly, NHRA racers running 442 W30s were dominating their classes. Rivals protested. Magazine articles hinted at corporate sandbagging. Chevy and Mopar fans were furious, and quietly, GM was panicking, because their own lie was now winning trophies. To calm things down, GM stopped actively supporting Oldsmobile's racing efforts. Factory help dried up. The W30 was left in the shadows, while Chevy got the spotlight. But the damage was already done. The legend of the hidden horsepower was cemented. Part 15. The Cult of the W30 begins. By the mid-1970s, the muscle car era was collapsing. Insurance premiums skyrocketed, emissions regulations choked performance, and the 1973 oil crisis killed demand for big block monsters. But something unusual happened with the 442 W30. Instead of fading into obscurity, it started building a cult following. Why? Because the people who owned them knew the truth. They knew GM had lied, the numbers were fake, and that their car was faster than the brochures admitted. Stories spread through car clubs, street races, and drag strips. The W30 became the hidden king of the muscle era, not because it was the most famous, but because it was the most underrated. Oldsmobile itself was slowly retreating from performance. By 1972, compression dropped, horsepower ratings were switched to net instead of gross, and the golden days were over. But that only made the early W30s, especially the 1970 model, more mythical. In garages across America, enthusiasts preserved them, raced them, and whispered about how GM had buried their own best car. That whisper would one day turn into a roar. Part 16. 1972. The beginning of the end. 1972 marked a turning point. For the muscle car world, it was like someone flipped a switch. Compression ratios dropped, leaded fuel was on its way out, and the government forced automakers to rate horsepower in a new way, net horsepower instead of gross. Suddenly, Oldsmobile's mighty W30 went from 370 horsepower to a depressing 300 horsepower on paper. But here's the trick. The engine itself didn't change much. The real difference was the rating system. Still, to the average buyer reading brochures, the W30 looked neutered. Insurance companies piled on. A teenager walking into an Olds dealership now faced sky-high premiums just for looking at a 442. Combine that with gas prices climbing, and suddenly the W30 was no longer the dream car of the working-class hot rodder. Inside GM, executives were quietly celebrating. The 442 W30 was being strangled without them needing to kill it outright. Chevrolet once again had the performance spotlight. Oldsmobile, back to being the doctor's car. But the legend wasn't dead yet. Part 17. The lies get louder. Here's the bitter truth. GM wasn't just limiting the W30, they were actively covering it up. Oldsmobile brochures from 1972-1974 downplayed performance entirely. They emphasized luxury, ride comfort, and styling. Words like horsepower and torque disappeared. In some ads, the 442 was presented more like a personal luxury coupe than a muscle car. But ask anyone who drove one of those early 70s W30s, and they'll tell you, the engine still had teeth. Even with lower compression, even with emissions equipment, a well-tuned W30 could outrun what the ad suggested. The car was faster than its image, and that was exactly the problem. Why would GM lie louder as performance declined? Because they didn't want enthusiasts to realize Oldsmobile was still hiding speed in plain sight. The more they kept Oldsmobile in the shadows, the easier it was to crown Chevy and Pontiac as GM's performance kings. The W30 was no longer a car. It was a victim of corporate image manipulation. Part 18. Racing in the shadows. While GM pulled factory support, the streets told a different story. Local drag strips in the mid-1970s were filled with underdog Oldsmobile racers keeping the W30 spirit alive. Tuners discovered that with minor tweaks, headers, carb tuning, rear-end gearing, the 442 U30 could still hang with big Chevelles and Mopars, even in the era of emission strangulation. But here's the irony. Because GM had downplayed the W30 so heavily, rival racers underestimated it. They thought of Oldsmobile as a grandpa brand, which made it even sweeter when an Olds guy rolled up to the line, dropped the hammer, and left a Camaro or Challenger gasping for air. The NHRA still saw traces of the controversy. W30s competed in stock and superstock classes, often performing above their rated category. Racers knew it, fans knew it, GM knew it, but by then, corporate Detroit didn't care. Performance was no longer profitable. Safety, emissions, and fuel economy ruled the boardrooms. In the shadows, though, the W30 was quietly carving its myth. It was becoming the underground assassin of the muscle car world. Part 19. Forgotten but not gone. By the late 1970s, muscle cars were essentially dead. Corvettes wheezed with under 200 horsepower. Mustangs had shrunk into economy cars. And the once mighty 442, reduced to little more than a trim package on cutlasses, with stickers and stripes doing the work an engine once did. To the casual buyer, the 442 W30 was forgotten. But to hardcore enthusiasts, those early 70s cars were gold. Car clubs started forming around Oldsmobile performance. Magazine articles written by enthusiasts, not corporations, began revisiting the glory days of the 1970 W30. Classified ads in the back of Hot Rod and Hemmings Motor News whispered about underrated horsepower and factory lie. The cult following wasn't mainstream yet, but a seed had been planted. To own a W30 in the late 70s was to own a secret. It was a badge of rebellion, proof you knew something the general public didn't. GM may have tried to erase its legend, but they only made it more mysterious. Part 20. The Rise of the Cult. In the 1980s. The 1980s were all about revival. Drag racing surged back. Car magazines began celebrating the lost muscle era, and collectors started hunting for the forgotten kings. Guess which car they found sitting quietly in barns and garages? The Oldsmobile 442 W30. In the 1980s, car auctions and swap meets were buzzing with stories. This thing was rated 370 HP but dynoed at 430. Olds beat Chevelles back in 70. GM buried it because it was too good. The myth had finally become legend. Street racers in the 80s even nicknamed the W30 the gentleman's Hemi killer. It wasn't as famous as the LS6 or the 426 Hemi, but that made it cooler. It was a sleeper story, a car for insiders who knew the truth. And that truth spread fast. By the late 80s, the 442 W30 had become a cult icon. Owners weren't just collectors, they were historians, keeping alive the tale of how GM lied, how Oldsmobile fought back, and how one muscle car became a buried treasure. This wasn't just nostalgia, it was justice. Part 21. The 1990s. Nostalgia. Awakens. By the 1990s, America was going through a wave of muscle car nostalgia. Magazines like Muscle Car Review and Hemmings Muscle Machines started reprinting drag test numbers from the 1960s and 70s. TV shows like Dream Car Garage and Barrett-Jackson Auctions were giving forgotten heroes their spotlight. And there, buried under decades of dust, the Oldsmobile 442 W30 was suddenly rediscovered. Collectors realized this wasn't just another muscle car. This was GM's buried secret, the car that had been downplayed and lied about. That mystery, that sense of being the hidden one, made it irresistible. Car clubs like the Oldsmobile Club of America grew in membership. Owners were finally treated like gatekeepers of an untold story. And while Camaros and Chevelle fetched headlines, the Olds 442 W30 started creeping up in value, like a sleeping giant stirring awake. By the late 90s, auctions were reporting pristine W30 convertibles selling for six figures. That wasn't just money, that was validation. It was America saying, "We remember you, Oldsmobile." But the timing was bittersweet, because as collectors celebrated the W30, the Oldsmobile brand itself was dying. Part 22. 2000. The death of Oldsmobile. In December 2000, GM announced the unthinkable. Oldsmobile, the oldest American car brand founded in 1897, was being shut down. For W30 enthusiasts, it was like losing a family member. The very division that had built one of the most underrated muscle cars in history was gone. The Cutlass, the Toronado, the Aurora, all would vanish. No revival, no future, just silence. But here's the twist. The death of Oldsmobile only made the W30 more legendary. Suddenly this wasn't just a rare car, it was a relic of a dead brand. A reminder of a company that GM buried twice, once with lies in the 1970s, and again by killing the badge in 2004. Collectors leaned in harder. Owning a 442 W30 wasn't just about horsepower anymore. It was about preserving Oldsmobile's soul. Every restored W30 became a rolling time capsule. Proof that Oldsmobile once stood shoulder to shoulder with Chevy, Pontiac, and Mopar. Ironically, GM's attempt to erase Oldsmobile made the W30 impossible to forget. Part 23. The Underground Builders and Resto Mod Revolution. As the 2000s rolled into the 2010s, a new generation took hold of the W30. They weren't content to just park them in climate-controlled garages. They wanted to rebuild, reimagine, and race them again. Enter the Resto Mod era. Builders started dropping modern LS engines, fuel injection, coilover suspensions, and 6-speed gearboxes into W30s. Some purists hated it, calling it sacrilege, but others saw it as evolution. The W30's spirit, reborn with 21st century muscle. On YouTube, underground drag videos surfaced of 442 W30s shocking Hellcats, Mustangs, even Corvettes. It was déjà vu, just like the 1970s, when nobody expected an Olds to win, and yet it did. Custom shops like Ring Brothers and independent builders elevated the Olds 442 into show-stopping machines. These weren't just restorations, they were statements. Every resto mod screamed the same message. GM lied about this car once. We won't let it be forgotten again. The W30 wasn't just a cult classic now, it was an outlaw reborn. Part 24, The Modern Cult, Auctions, Legends, and Insiders. By the 2010s and 2020s, the Oldsmobile 442 W30 had fully ascended into legend. At Barrett-Jackson Mecum and RM Sotheby's auctions, pristine 1970 W30 convertibles started selling for over $400,000. A record-breaking price that put it shoulder to shoulder with Mopar Hemis and Chevy LS6 Chevelles. The forgotten child of GM had become one of the most expensive collector cars of its era. But here's the thing. Ask anyone outside hardcore car circles about the W30, and most shrug. They'll say, "Isn't Oldsmobile just a Cutlass?" That's what makes the cult so strong. Owning a W30 isn't mainstream. It's insider knowledge. It's belonging to a secret society of gearheads who know the truth. That GM lied, that horsepower was hidden, and that this gentleman's muscle car could run with the wildest of them. At car meets, Spotting a 442 W30 is like seeing a ghost. Crowds gather. Whispers start. That's the one GM lied about. And suddenly, the car isn't just metal. It's mythology. Part 25. Why the 442 W30 still matters today. Half a century later, why does the Oldsmobile 442 W30 still matter? Because it's more than a car. It's a story of corporate lies, hidden horsepower, and rebellion. A story of how a brand meant for doctors and lawyers accidentally built one of the rawest muscle cars of all time. It matters because it proves something about America itself, that truth has a way of surfacing. GM tried to bury the W30 under false numbers, politics, and silence. But enthusiasts uncovered it, drag racers proved it, collectors preserved it, and builders resurrected it. Every time a W30 fires up today, it's not just an engine roaring, it's history correcting itself. It's proof that performance can't be hidden, that passion outlives corporations, and that even a forgotten car can become immortal. The Oldsmobile 442 W30 isn't just a muscle car. It's a legend whispered in garages, shouted on drag strips, and etched into the heart of American car culture. GM lied, but the W30 told the truth, and that truth is still burning rubber today. If you loved uncovering the secrets behind America's most underrated muscle car, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the journey with Revved Tales. Don't forget to like and share this video with anyone who loves raw horsepower, forgotten legends, and the untold stories of automotive history. This is Apex from Revved Tales, and remember, in the world of cars, the truth is always faster than the lie.